What if I told you that something as small and fragrant as a curl of cinnamon bark once drove kings and conquerors to sail into the unknown? That humble slabs of salted cod, dry, tough, and fishy, were the quiet fuel behind some of the most daring voyages in human history. It may sound strange, but these seemingly ordinary ingredients played extraordinary roles in charting the course of civilization. You see, history isn't just carved into stone monuments or written in dusty tomes. It's simmering in stews, packed in barrels, and traded across continents. This isn't merely a tale of grand ships and celestial navigation, of wind-filled sails and fearless explorers. No, this is a deeper, richer story, one told by the hunger that pushed humans across oceans, the preservation techniques that made long journeys possible, and the cravings that sparked the global spice hunt. This is the story of how our pursuit of taste, sustenance, and culinary curiosity helped connect continents and create the modern world. Your dinner plate, yes, the one you eat from every day, is a living museum of those explorations. Every ingredient has a passport, every flavor a tale. Behind each bite lies a history of adventure, ambition, and even conflict. So buckle up, because today, we're not just digging into a meal, we're digging into the very foundation of global discovery. Welcome to the Legendary Feasts, the channel where we serve up history with a hearty side of flavor. Here, every episode uncovers the forgotten stories behind the foods you thought you knew. And today's menu: a journey across oceans, deserts, and empires, fueled not by gasoline or ambition alone, but by the very thing that sits on your plate, food. Today, we dive into the role of food in exploration, how cuisine facilitated discovery. It's easy to assume that history's great explorers set sail for gold, power, or prestige, and yes, those were powerful motivators. But beneath those lofty ambitions was something far more primal, more persistent: hunger. Hunger for the exotic. Hunger for resources. Hunger to simply stay alive in a world where the next meal was never guaranteed. Imagine, if you will, a world where the scent of nutmeg could spark naval arms races, where peppercorns were weighed like jewels, and where a single citrus fruit could mean the difference between life and death on the high seas. Food was far more than fuel, it was a compass, a currency, and often, a cause. From the vast spice routes that stitched Asia to Europe, to the humble barrels of hardtack and salted meat stacked beneath the decks of creaking ships, cuisine was not a background detail. It was a strategic asset. Without the ability to preserve food, without the salted fish, dried beans, fermented cabbage, or hard biscuits, no expedition would have survived beyond the harbor. And without the tantalizing promise of new flavors and ingredients, no monarch would have funded those same journeys. In truth, food was the silent co-pilot in every age of exploration, guiding and sustaining those who dared to chase the horizon. So today, we set sail not on a ship, but through stories, across time and across taste, because understanding how cuisine facilitated discovery is to understand the roots of globalization itself. Cloves, pepper, nutmeg, cinnamon. At first glance, these might seem like simple kitchen staples, commonplace spices tucked away in a pantry. But rewind the clock, just a few centuries, and you'll find that these tiny, fragrant fragments of bark, seeds, and dried buds were the stuff of obsession, fortune, and fierce ambition. In medieval and early modern Europe, spices weren't just ingredients. They were symbols of status, tools of survival, and even instruments of empire. Imagine living in a world before refrigeration, where preserving food wasn't a convenience, but a necessity. In this world, spices like pepper and cinnamon weren't just flavor enhancers, they were essential preservatives, masking the taste of aging meat and extending the life of scarce provisions. But their value went far beyond the kitchen. Spices were believed to have powerful medicinal properties: nutmeg to cure the plague, cloves to ease toothaches, cinnamon to warm the blood in cold winters. In a society governed by mystery and superstition, these spices became almost mystical. Their rarity and exotic origins only amplified their worth. A single sack of cloves could fetch enough to buy a small farm. Owning spices was a clear sign of wealth and refinement, and using them in food or displaying them in the home was as much a performance of power as it was a culinary choice. So, it's no surprise that Europe's greatest navigators didn't just set out to expand empires, they set out in search of spice. Driven by this aromatic obsession, explorers like Vasco da Gama, Ferdinand Magellan, and Christopher Columbus embarked on perilous voyages that would reshape the world. They weren't merely tracing coastlines or seeking mythical lands. They were chasing flavor, hunting for the sources of the spices that had bewitched their continent. And in doing so, they redrew the global map, connected distant cultures, and laid the foundation for centuries of trade, colonization, and cultural exchange. In truth, behind every great voyage of the age of exploration, there was the subtle scent of spice, whispering promises of riches, prestige, and possibility. How do you feed dozens, sometimes hundreds, of sailors packed onto wooden ships, drifting across vast, unpredictable oceans for months on end? There are no ports to stop at. No fresh markets. No refrigerators humming quietly below deck. Just rolling waves, endless sky, and the ever-present threat of starvation. The answer lies not in variety, but in durability. You preserve the food. Salted cod, hardtack biscuits, dried legumes, these weren't gourmet meals. They were survival. Salted cod, for instance, was dried and packed so densely with salt that it could last for years without spoiling. It was lightweight, protein-rich, and could be rehydrated when needed, making it a staple on ships from Portugal to Scandinavia. Hardtack was the sailor's bread, a rock-solid biscuit made of flour and water, baked until it was practically immortal. It didn't taste like much, but it didn't mold either, and that was the point. Dried legumes like lentils and peas offered fiber, and some much-needed variety, in an otherwise monotonous diet. These preserved provisions were far from luxurious, and often barely palatable. Hardtack could break teeth. Salted meats were sometimes so tough, they had to be soaked for days before eating. Yet without these rugged rations, the great voyages of the Age of Discovery might have collapsed before they even began. Starvation and scurvy were constant threats, and food was more than sustenance. It was morale, it was medicine, and it was mission critical. The success of an expedition depended as much on barrels of beans and sacks of biscuit as it did on navigational charts or sturdy hulls. Every voyage was a gamble, but having preserved food on board increased the odds. It kept sailors alive long enough to discover new lands, establish new routes, and return with tales and cargo that would forever alter the world. In a way, the real heroes of global exploration weren't always the captains or kings. Sometimes, it was the humble codfish and the rock-hard biscuit that carried history forward. Food wasn't just the motivation behind the great voyages, it was also the treasure they returned with. Yes, gold filled the coffers of empires and spices delighted the elite, but it was the humble foods, those strange, colorful, and unfamiliar crops, that would truly revolutionize the world. Nowhere is this more evident than in what historians call the Columbian Exchange, a seismic, culinary turning point in human history. When Christopher Columbus and subsequent explorers crossed the Atlantic, they didn't just encounter new people and landscapes, they encountered a radically different pantry. Tomatoes, potatoes, chocolate, maize, chili peppers, vanilla, beans, peanuts, pineapples, the list is long and astonishing. And these weren't just curiosities. They were game changers. Each new discovery sparked waves of culinary transformation that rippled across continents. Imagine Italian food without tomatoes. Impossible, right? Yet tomatoes are native to the Americas, and weren't known in Europe before the 16th century. Consider Ireland without potatoes, or Indian curries without chili. French desserts without vanilla. West African stews without maize. These foods rewrote recipes, redefined diets, and helped populations grow and thrive in entirely new ways. Exploration was driven by a hunger for flavor and wealth, yes, but the true reward was deeper. It was the expansion of the human palate. The act of daring to taste the unknown, to sample a strange fruit, to plant a new seed, to grind an unfamiliar bean into powder, became an act of transformation. Entire cuisines evolved not through conquest or colonization alone, but through curiosity and exchange. The fork became mightier than the sword. In a very real sense, food was the ultimate prize of exploration. Not just as sustenance, but as culture, as identity, as legacy. And every time we eat a meal that blends ingredients from different corners of the world, we're still participating in that bold experiment of discovery. Food didn't just sustain explorers or drive them toward distant shores. It also served as the first ambassador between strangers. In those pivotal, often tense moments of first contact between European explorers and indigenous peoples, before a single word could be translated or a treaty could be proposed, it was food that spoke the universal language of humanity. Imagine the scene: weary sailors stepping onto unfamiliar soil after months at sea, desperate for nourishment and connection. On the other side, native communities watching cautiously, trying to make sense of these strange, pale visitors with their metal tools and curious clothing. And in the space between suspicion and diplomacy, came an offering: a handful of maize, a fish roasted over a fire, fruits plucked from nearby trees. These weren't just gifts of survival. They were gestures of peace, of generosity, of welcome. Food became the earliest form of communication, a way to say, we come in peace, or at the very least, we are willing to share. Shared meals, whether humble or ceremonial, often became the first point of contact where trust could begin to form. Think of the early encounters in the Americas, where indigenous peoples introduced European newcomers to the native bounty of the land: maize, squash, beans, and more. These were foods unfamiliar to the explorers, but essential to their survival. In return, Europeans offered bread, wine, salted meat, culinary curiosities to the indigenous hosts. Feasts, whether improvised or formal, created a rare and fragile common ground. Around a fire, over a meal, people who had never heard each other's languages could at least break bread, or something like it. For a moment, exploration wasn't about conquest or maps, but about two groups of people simply trying to understand one another through the oldest act of community: eating together. Of course, history shows us that these first contacts didn't always lead to peaceful coexistence. But in that initial moment, before colonization, before conflict, food offered a glimpse of mutual recognition. A shared bowl of stew, or a bite of roasted fish, could accomplish what words and weapons could not: a brief bridge between worlds. So here's a question for you: what's your favorite food with a story behind it? Is it chocolate, once used as currency by the Aztecs? Or maybe black pepper, which sparked centuries of trade wars and imperial ambition? Have you ever looked at the spices in your pantry and realized that each one carries the weight of empires, the trail of explorers, and the imprint of cultural exchange? Your kitchen isn't just a place for daily meals, it's a living museum of human history. That cinnamon stick, once worth more than gold. That potato, it changed the face of Europe. Every ingredient has a past, a journey, and a legacy. The meals we cook and enjoy today are the result of countless voyages, encounters, risks, and revelations. So, take a moment, look at your next meal, and ask yourself, what stories are on your plate? We'd love to hear from you. Drop your favorite historic food in the comments. Maybe it's something your grandmother used to make, or a dish you discovered on your travels that has centuries of tradition behind it. Because every comment helps us piece together the grand mosaic of edible history, and your voice is part of that narrative. And if this journey through time and taste sparked your curiosity, do us a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the legendary feasts for more deliciously rich stories from the past. Let's keep exploring history, one bite at a time. When we think of the great explorers of history, we often imagine them as brave figures with compasses in hand, navigating vast oceans and conquering unknown lands. We picture their courage, their daring voyages, and the legacies they left behind. But the next time you sit down to enjoy a warm bowl of curry, savor a piece of chocolate, or twirl pasta with tomato sauce, take a moment to realize something extraordinary. Food, too, played a starring role in guiding the course of humanity. It was food that spurred these brave adventurers to leave the safety of their homelands and set sail into the great unknown. Spices, crops, and culinary wonders were the treasures they sought, the rewards they brought back, and the connections they forged along the way. The influence of food didn't just shape meals, it shaped civilizations, built bridges between cultures, and sparked incredible journeys that changed the world forever. Exploration wasn't just about discovering new lands or claiming territories. It was about feeding the soul, quite literally. The need for sustenance drove explorers to seek out new flavors, new ingredients, and new ways to preserve food for long, perilous voyages. And every new discovery, every new recipe, every new bite became part of a grander, global story. Even today, every meal we enjoy carries echoes of those historic exchanges, those daring journeys, and the enduring impact of exploration. So, next time you take a bite, remember, you're tasting a piece of history. Every dish has a backstory, one that spans continents, centuries, and cultures. So keep tasting, keep exploring, and keep asking yourself, where did this come from? Because history, like a great recipe, is still being written, one delicious bite at a time. If you've enjoyed this tasty journey through time, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into the flavors of history. Until next time, bon appetit and bon voyage.